Now here we will look at the Linux account authentication. What does it really mean? Is that you create local accounts, right, on your local computer. In this case, we have our Linux machine. We created our local accounts. We just learned that, right? So what if you have like thousands of users? So then how can you manage all those users? How can you change their password? So then that's the problem comes in when you have to actually add multiple users to, of course, multiple servers as well. So what will happen if a user joins a company and or a system administrator or a new user joins a company and you have to create his or her account to, let's say, 1,000 servers. Now, are you going to log into every server and create a user account? Well, that's not efficient. And usually the companies don't work that way and they don't actually create user accounts individually to each server. So what they do is in Windows environment, they add some kind of directory service or directory server where user could log in having the authentication through a different server. So how it works, so let's see what type of accounts there are. So there are basically two type of accounts that you have. One account that is sitting local to your machine, meaning that you create a user account in Linux machine by running a command user add, and then you add it to the group or give permissions and so on. So most of the Linux accounts we created locally, and the reason we create most of the Linux accounts is because Linux is not like a user environment where user will log in and perform different tasks. It is basically used for system administration purposes or for to run major applications. Anyway, so if you need to create a local user account, we already learned that. Now, the question comes in, what if you have to create a user account to 10,000 different servers? Then you have to have a domain or directory accounts on a server. So how it works is you have all your user accounts under one database. So look at this picture. So you have a client, which is a server, which is your Linux machine, any Linux machine that you have installed. And then you have another server, which is, in our case, we call it a directory server. So a directory server, a user try to log into the client, and the account authentication goes against the server. So the server checks to see if that account exists. And if the account exists, it will reply back saying the user has been authenticated and it's okay for user to go ahead and log in. And that's how a user that is created on the directory structure will log in. Now remember, this is not for those users that are created locally. This authentication process only works with the client and the server. So there is a server out there in Windows, there's Active Directory. So it gets authenticated, it comes back, and that's how you get it authenticated. So in Windows, now Windows has this product Active Directory, which is called Microsoft Active Directory, which is awesome product. It works so good. It works so efficiently for the users. So how it works is you go into the Windows Active Directory server, you create an account on the Active Directory, and then it gets authenticated, and then you can log into the client. So now remember how this works. This goes into the server and what protocol is uses. If you need to log into server, what protocol you use? You use SSH, right? So if you want to log into the server using Active Directory or some kind of a directory service, you will use a, a protocol called LDAP. So the question is, does Linux uses LDAP? Now remember one thing, guys. LDAP is it's a protocol. It's not a directory that you get authenticated for Linux users. A lot of people have this misconception. So please clear that misconception that LDAP is not used for Linux. LDAP is just a protocol that is used for Windows, for Linux, or any server, or any even Mac. They use this protocol to authenticate against a directory. So what does LDAP is? So why a lot of people says, well, LDAP, use LDAP for Linux. Well, that's not a real case. So, in my next lesson, I will tell you exactly the difference between LDAP, Active Directory, and all other different directory servers that are out there that you could use for Linux authentication or even for Windows authentication. Not necessarily Windows needs to use Active Directory. There are other products people use. So, Active Directory is native to Windows. That's why people use it and mostly use it in a corporate environment. But in Linux, I'm telling you again, there is no such thing called LDAP. And people says, hey, go ahead, use LDAP. No, LDAP, again, it's a protocol. You could look it up. It's called Lightweight Directory Assistant Protocol or Directory something protocol. You could look it up. So anyway, so that's a protocol that is used. So I'll go over to the next lesson and I'll explain you the difference between every directory services.